While our participants express mixed feelings individually and collectively about the success of the middle school movement to communicate effectively a clear ideology and then to implement best practices in schools based on those ideals, their opinions about the movement's efforts to respond to the needs of young adolescents were less varied. Clearly, they believe that young adolescents have benefited from the efforts of middle school initiatives. James Bean spoke emphatically about this element of the movement.
Well, there's no question that young adolescents have benefited enormously from the middle school movement. I can tell you that even in the most mainstream middle schools where people haven't really pushed the edges of the concept, even in those schools, I think more teachers than ever are more understanding and responsive to young adolescents. I think there's in schools a much greater understanding of kids than ever before.
Joan Lipsett's recollection helps us understand the magnitude of our progress in this area. She explained that when she wrote her book, Growing Up Forgotten, in 1977, early adolescence was a non-field. In her research, she discovered that a lack of attention to young adolescents was not an education anomaly.
The age group was also not being studied or written about in the medical community or in social science areas such as psychology and sociology. She found that in the early 1970s, in all of the United States and Canada, there were only 15 residencies in adolescent medicine. She recalled her amazement at this lack of available research and information.
It was stunning to me that this age group was a non-field. It wasn't just about what was going on or not going on in schools. It was about what wasn't going on for a completely pivotal age group in the lifespan. It was amazing to me that you could have an age group that everybody knew was important and that nobody was willing to pay attention to.
Now nearly 50 years after William Alexander proposed the middle school in 1963, and nearly 40 years after the publication of Growing Up Forgotten, millions of young adolescents have benefited from an approach to education that was specifically conceived to attend to their needs. On the day of his interview, Paul George heard Jocelyn Elders speak at a general session of the National Middle School Association annual conference. He commented on her remarks.
Jocelyn Elders today mentioned that there are 20 million young adolescents in middle schools today. If you multiply 20 million by 30 years, I think you can say that by any means, the last two generations of young adolescents have been the direct recipients of innovative education and benefited from it immeasurably, far more than they would have had the middle school movement not been there for them.
Certainly, since Lipsetz brought national attention to young adolescents in the late 1970s, we have seen improvements in the lives of many young adolescents. However, our interview participants readily noted some areas where continued growth is needed to move the ideals of middle school education forward. Some of our participants indicated in the beginning the middle school movement was strongest in suburban white communities.
The larger assumption of the middle school movement was that every single child should have a first-class seat, that there should be equal educational access and opportunity to the best curriculum, the best teachers, the best resources, the richest learning opportunities we have.
However, the participants we interviewed believe reaching all young adolescents, regardless of their social, cultural, or academic status, is a challenge and opportunity for the next generation of middle-level education leaders. Doda spoke earnestly about the need to broaden and intensify the scope of middle-level education.
Our most vulnerable students are the very students that in middle schools need heightened affiliation, heightened intimacy, heightened connection with human beings, long-term accountability relationships with adults and other kids. They need environments that are extremely safe and trusting circles of friendship and security, and we've diminished the emphasis on that in the name of test accountability. And so ironically, in the short term, while things may shift and appear to be favorable for test scores, ultimately it will bottom out. And those children who've needed those wonderful elements of middle school, the strong affiliation focus, will suffer. and the gap will widen again. One of the things I keep hoping for is that people will get it, that they'll get the connection between affiliation and academic, accomplishment, that it'll become eminently clear that if you want, to make a difference in the lives of children, that you have to let children, or if you want to be an incredible interruption in the lives of children, you have to let children be an incredible interruption in your life, which means that children have to be part of the middle school experience. And we can't just do school to them. But I do think that there are people out there who get that and are beginning to say, maybe the contrast is becoming clearer as there's less and less of that good stuff and problems start mounting in schools, that people will become, like in the Columbine post, window of time, a little bit more aware that you can't create good middle schools without that kind of affiliation.
Bean suggested that the lack of authentic middle schools in urban areas is a two-way street. While he agrees that the middle school movement has not had a deliberate enough reach into urban areas, he also believes that
the administrators, central office, and others in large urban areas believe, like the general society, that poor kids of color need structure of the sort that is the drill and kill and rote memorization. And that's antithetical to what we think of as the middle school concept.
Bean further elaborated that the National Middle School Association has had some involvement from people of color, but that given the percentage of young adolescents in the United States who are in urban middle schools, it has not been nearly enough. Perhaps urban centers are the next frontier for middle school education.
Participants such as Doda, Gatewood, and Lounsbury spoke about the power of middle schools to provide places of affiliation for young adolescents, and that such affiliation is connected to academic accomplishment and positive self-esteem. Lounsbury discussed the power of middle school education to affect the future.
Government can't do it. Family can't even do it anymore. Church can't do it anymore. I regret that. But the middle school is the one place where we really have a chance to make a difference.
Certainly the public who funds education wants to see young people who are connected to their schools and communities, who are achieving academically and who feel good about themselves. In fact, to those inside the movement, advocacy for young adolescents likely seemed so morally justified that it might have seemed inconceivable that anyone could dispute it. However, Johnson warned that we have, at times, promised too much and therefore opened ourselves to criticism.
When you promise much, and we do, if you fail to deliver on those promises, you become the target of criticism. And in some respects, we promise too much, I think. We're going to take care of a kid's self-esteem. We're going to make them literate. We're going to make them smart. We're going to make them a well-adjusted, decent human being. We're going to make them a functional member of society. We're going to make them a good neighbor. We're going to make them a contributing member of his or her community. Man, that's a tall order. And you run the risk of having such a shopping list of promises, you don't do any of them well, or even if you do 80% of them well, you're still not doing everything you promised you're going to do.
Finally, as with most aspects of education, we must communicate more effectively about young adolescents and their needs. We cannot let the portrayals of young adolescents in the media prevail as the public's perception of reality.
Rather, we must emphasize what Nancy Doda calls
wonderful, rich, beautiful, intellectual, philosophical, spiritual side of development.
Can't you see the stars are shifting ever so slowly? Once an X in the sky, now across for quite some time, and we're the oldest that we've ever been, and we're the youngest that we're ever gonna be again. Getting closer to a time where seasons don't mean freedom anymore.